All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting for November 21st, 2019. The first item on our agenda is a consideration of the minutes from the regular meeting on October 23rd, 2019. Those minutes were supplied to the board members. Are there any changes necessary to those? If not, those will stand as approved, and we'll move on to new business. Got one item today, a variance request. It's application Z19032 by Nate Williams, representing the City of Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department, requesting a 50-foot variance from the maximum 20-foot height for lighting fixtures. This is for property in the park zone, and the address is 1233 Cherry Lane. If you'd review that for us.
Absolutely. Good morning. Good afternoon. So this request is for height variance, as you mentioned earlier, for 6 existing soccer fields on Jordan Farms Park. They're looking to put up a total of 24 light poles around the 6 soccer fields. This is an accompaniment of a recent rezoning request that's going for Jordan Farms to rezone that from residential single family to park. While these poles have a newer technology, this is not dissimilar from the requests that you've gotten for height variances at the Cherry Lane soccer fields down the road at Siegel Park, and on the, I believe that's Franklin Road Park that's not currently under construction yet. You had done that request last year as well. I don't think I have anything to add, unless you do, Matthew. Nate Williams is here from the Parks and Recreation Department if you have any questions for him, and if anything that he'd like to say. And if you have any questions for me, I'm here as well.
Any questions for staff? Matthew, would like to provide some?
I want to add one thing to what Mr. Cooper mentioned. There was another similar request, a height variance request for the lighting fixtures at the Miracle Field that the Board of Zoning Appeals approved in 2016. Those fixtures aren't the same height that they're requesting this time, but it's another example of this type of variance that's come before you. And one thing I did want to mention, originally they had come before you, the Parks and Recreation Department did, before the new soccer fields were constructed, because it was zoned RS-15 and a special use permit was required at the time to develop recreational fields in the RS-15 zoning district. The property was recently rezoned to Park P District. I believe it passed second and final reading just a couple of weeks ago. So the use itself is permitted by right. The recreational use is permitted by right. So there's no need for it to come back to amend the special use permit or for a new special use permit, because the use is permitted by right, no longer by special use permit. However, they do need to come before you in the request for a height variance for the light fixtures for the soccer fields, and that is the reason they're before you today, is for the height variance.
If the variance is for is the variance for the RS-15 zone, or is the variance under the park zone? Is this request assuming the park variance, since it'll be in effect tomorrow, or is this under our previous RS-15 zoning?
No, any approval of this should be, and I apologize for neglecting to mention this, any approval of this should be contingent upon the park zoning district becoming effective, which will be tomorrow when it will be officially become effective.
Okay. So we'll be, all of the 20-foot height limit is what is currently by right in a park setting.
That's what's currently by right in every zoning district.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a park or...
That's correct. Lighting fixtures are the height of lighting fixtures are dictated by the height of structures on the property. So if there are structures that are 20 feet in height or excuse me, 35 feet in height or less, the lighting fixtures have to be 20 feet or less. In the park zoning district, there is, if I'm not mistaken, there is actually no maximum building height for structures, but there is a maximum building height for lighting fixtures. And so, because there are no structures on the property currently, there are proposed to be a small building for restrooms, but because there are no structures on the property that exceed 35 feet in height, without a variance, they can go no higher with their lighting fixtures than 20 feet.
Okay.
I would also like to add that similar requests in the past, the one for Miracle Field, to be exact, they have done the 0.5 light candle request as well. This is just for height. There will be no exceeding 0.5 light candles at the property lines.
And I do think it would be beneficial to the board to hear from Mr. Williams and have him kind of explain the new lighting technology that they're planning on using, and also to kind of maybe go over the need or the reason why the fields are now being lit and the changes that are occurring in the various facilities on Cherry Lane.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Blomley. This is an element to our renovations at Siegel Soccer Complex with our partnership with the Tennessee State Soccer Association. This is a key element in this whole project. So the first phase of this project is to light these fields. This is number one that gives us the capacity at these fields to be able to hold the types of practices and games that we need to when the other fields are under construction. Then it also helps us as soccer grows and we end up having more regional national tournaments, we can use these additional fields more and more. So it's a key part of that, lighting, and then the artificial turf, and then the indoor practice facility is phase number one that we're working on. This is the first step in that process. The technology we're going with is the LED lighting. It's similar to what we have at the back part of Adams Tennis Complex, which is pretty amazing. If you see that, you can see where it kind of zeroes out on the photometric scale, basically at the line of play, and it doesn't exceed much more and be directed down. We've seen this in a lot of facilities, and it works really well. It's considerably more expensive, but we think the best application for this situation.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr.
I do. I have a question. Help me understand orientation. Is this, Jordan, this portion is part of Siegel Park? The backside?
Yeah, so it's not right next to Siegel Park. It would be a separate, there's private property in between, so there's no direct connection to Siegel Park.
No direct connection.
Correct.
And it's in an area where, unlike Miracle Field, which is mainly commercial,
Sure.
we're in an area where it's mainly residential around it, right?
I would say that's safe to say there's no commercial around it.
I mean, it's safe to say there's a lot of residential around it.
There is a lot of residential. I'd say it's mostly surrounded by the water department's property.
Okay. So what kind of feedback have you gotten from the neighbors?
I think I've had one call just asking. The question that I received, the one phone call that I received, I don't know if Mr. Blomley received any more, was that they thought that we were adding 6 more fields being lit. And that was the one question that I received, and I clarified that it's not that, it's just lighting those fields.
The original fields at Siegel, they're lit currently? Different technology?
Yes, a different technology.
And Mr. Cooper has the Google Earth aerial photo. You can see its relation and proximity to what's around it. You can see directly to the west of the property is the Jordan Farm, where the city sprays its repurified water. It fronts on Leanna Road. There are several houses to the north along Cherry Lane. You see the driveway, actually, it's a fairly long driveway that comes in from Cherry Lane and then goes back to the south of those houses that front directly on Cherry Lane. And then to the east of the subject property and to the south of the subject property, it's primarily undeveloped.
Mr. Tips, if I could also add, I think as the Cherry Lane project comes on board in the coming years, I think what's around this area is going to change dramatically in what you would see in the coming years.
Thank you, sir. Any further questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. If there's anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come forward, give us your name and address, and can give us any comments you may have.
My name is Nick Mangrum. I live at 3724 Leanna Road, the property directly behind the fields they built. I was one of the only that came and spoke, I guess 4 or 5 years ago when they started to build the fields. And we were, when Lanny was originally here, we had talked about moving the fields from the front of the complex to the back of the complex. And y'all added landscaping to create somewhat of a buffer to help with sound and that kind of stuff. We were promised there would be no late night evenings. We were promised that there would be no major usage. These would just be overflow for practice fields. That's all they were going to be. And that has since turned into not the case. When I walk out of my backyard, I live in Will Jordan's old house, so when I walk out of my back door, I look directly towards the Siegel Soccer Complex lights. Last night, they finally cut off at about 9:20, when they finally cut off. In the summertime, in the weekends, those things are on till 10 o'clock most nights. I don't know if that's how they're set or if there's an issue with someone going and cutting them off, but they're not cutting off when they're supposed to be at decent hours. Every single Sunday, there are 160 to 220 people that are playing soccer games all Sunday. All Sunday. These are not practice fields, which is what we were told they were going to be. We moved from Blackman to the Siegel area, the Leanna, Sulphur Springs area, to kind of get away from what Blackman was becoming, the big lights and the craziness. Where we live, there is nothing commercial. I mean, up to a couple years ago, Publix was the biggest thing that was out there. Yes, it is slowly growing, and yes, Miracle Field, I hear you talk about Miracle Field, but Miracle Field is directly off a main 5-lane highway. When you buy near Miracle Field, you know Sportscom is already there. Where we live, as you can see, I'm the only one. I'm probably the youngest person in my community by 30 plus years. It is an older community, so a lot of people unable to come here at 1 o'clock during the day because they're either working or they're retired and can't get out. All the neighbors I have spoke to, we're fine with the fields. We have no issues with them, but we see no need for lights whatsoever. If they're truly practice fields, are we talking adult practice fields or kids? What child needs to be practicing past dark? Now, if it's only on the Saturdays or Sundays, okay, then we can discuss that. But this is Monday nights, this is Wednesday nights, it's Tuesday nights. And whenever they have a big tournament or something down there at the Siegel, down at the corner, it's overflowing into these fields. This is not, these fields have become much, and I knew that. Whenever I came here, and I had 4 or 5 of my neighbors that came with us, and we said we're fine with the fields as long as this is how they're treated, right? And it's went way further than what it was said it was gonna be. If none of y'all live in the community, I would highly recommend y'all coming there at 8 or 9 o'clock at night and drive down Cherry Lane when this was my exact same complaint last time, that where Leanna Road and Cherry Lane intersect, for probably 6 or 7 houses, there's 2 streetlights. And so when they leave tournaments on the weekends at 9 o'clock plus, it's pitch black dark, from Cherry Lane to where Leanna is, it's backed up all the way to the complexes. Sometimes I can't even get in my driveway. We go around to get in our driveway. It's pitch black dark, there's no shoulder. They added a turning lane to get into the soccer complex, but that late at night, they're still leaving the soccer complex. So it's become much more invasive into our residential area. And I understand that this is city property and we can't do anything about it because we're a county. And I called my county representative the other day and he was not that aware of all the situation. I received my letter for this meeting Saturday morning. Unfortunately, I was in Kentucky, so I didn't get it till Monday. So when I called Monday afternoon and spoke to the 3 or 4 different people that are kind of in charge with the Parks and Recreation, they're all away on a conference, is what I was told. So no one talked to me. The secretary that was there told me that they were currently out of town and a lady that helps them was with them. Whether that's true or not, but that's what I was told. That's what 2 of my other neighbors were told too. They were not in. They could not be reached. The things that are so nice about Murfreesboro are becoming taken away because we got to have more soccer fields. We're not big enough, these big tournaments and all this. And it sounds good, but the beauty of Murfreesboro is being tarnished because the interstate, the backup from the soccer tournaments every weekend. And when they're on the weekend, that's fine, but it's not just the weekends. It's Monday nights, it's Tuesday nights. I mean, what was going on last night at the Siegel Fields? Were there games going on? Were there practices going on? Whatever it was, the lights did not cut off till well after dark. And that's just, I wish I had a big bus and I'd go get all my neighbors. Unfortunately, they're all 60 plus. If you're familiar with the area, it's an older community. And
Okay. We'll see if we can address some of your concerns for you. Appreciate your time. I don't mean to cut you off. We'll try to see if we can get some more information for you.
I'll say this in closing.
Okay.
That is exactly what we were told when they first built them. And they added some bushes, and the bush they put in was this tall. I mean, we're talking 15 plus years when anything happens. They're not what they were supposed to be. The lights are on way too late. There's no lighting for the roads surrounding. We're not built to, he's talking about when they build the 5-lane through there, that whole area is going to change. Okay, well, when that gets built, then let's put the lights. Right now, it's a residential area. There's not one piece of commercial property around that. And the spray field is farmland. It's not commercial. The city owns it, but it's spray field. It's farmland. So whenever the 5-lane gets built and that all gets rezoned commercial, then let's do lights. I'm fine with it. But until then, don't bring these lights. It's going to allow people into our communities much later than they need to be. There's no reason they need to be there after dark on practice fields. So, thank you.
Thanks, sir. Is anyone else present wishing to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or a motion. I guess I'm curious, maybe try to address it. Just questions. Sure, the hours of operation, what to expect. I mentioned being practice fields. I don't suspect that's in any sort of ordinance or what the use, maybe times and that sort of thing may be. But
It's not. I think right now, especially the time of year, it gets dark and we require lights at about 4:45. You usually have to turn them on even for practice at 4:30 as we go into the evening. So, the intended use of those fields has been really to just maximize their use as much as possible, and there's a need for it. We have a lot of organizations using those fields, so that's the simple answer, is that the lights, we're very much limited by time right now, especially this time of year.
What about his comments?
Which comment specific?
What about what he said he was promised way back when?
Yeah, I can't answer to that. I'm not aware of anything in documentation. I think we've looked, but
Yeah.
Do we have the minutes from the special use permit?
In the 2016 application, no lighting was proposed, and in the staff comments, it was mentioned that by Mr. Anthony that should they wish to have lighting, that they'd have to come back to amend their special use permit. But since it's been approved for park zoning, no amendment to the special use permit would be required. So it can be lit by right. It's just a matter of what's the height of the lighting fixtures that would be allowed.
So do we need to take any, so are you recommending that we don't take into consideration the comments and proposals made by the city regarding this property as to the special use permit due to the rezoning?
I can't speak to exactly what was said. All I know is that, that the application said no lighting was proposed with that special use permit. I don't know if there were any, I don't know what was said outside of that.
But those minutes are accessible to us if we chose to delay this proposal until such time as we were able to consider those minutes in the comments of the city in their application at that time.
Certainly, that would be at
And
your
we'd be able to
discretion.
get that information at a later date.
Absolutely. I think we have a copy of the minutes here with us.
Nate, could I ask, how many fields are over there now? Total?
What's our total amount of fields?
Total at Siegel Park?
21 fields.
21?
Yes, sir.
How many of those are lit?
All but 2.
What about these?
Right.
I'm sorry?
Come on.
Thomas Laird, Assistant Director of Parks Recreation. There's 21 fields total. We've recently lit the additional fields at Siegel so that we have 13 fields lit there. There's 2 fields that are with a TVA right away, so we're unable to put poles or anything. TVA will not give up those rights. So we have 2 fields that are unlit, and then there's 6 fields at the Jordan Farm. And I was a little bit involved in the approval for the Jordan project when we first started that. And to my recollection, from my involvement in it, is eventually we were always planning to put lights there. That was always the hopes that we could light those fields. At the time, there was a desperate need for practice locations. And if we've got lights on during the week, it's obvious that we've got a lot of usage. And we try to make sure that lights at Siegel are off by 9. Of course, soccer clubs push that, so they end their practice at 9. So for safety reasons, it's usually 9:15 to 9:20 when those lights come off. On weekends, it does go a little bit longer, but we desperately need these fields for practices. But without lights, we've found that the city has spent a significant amount of money on practice fields, and we're getting very limited usage with the daylight savings time.
How often are these fields at the Jordan Farm, are they used during the week?
Daily,
Every day, 7
Right.
days a week?
absolutely.
The other fields at this property, I guess the current park, they're lighted and subject to the photometric lighting plan, however many foot candles at the boundary, so that those are in place and they're not exceeding, well, you may see it from a distance as far as the regulations would lay out. They're meeting that.
Are you talking about at the existing
The
Siegel
current-
Soccer Park?
Current ones that
Yeah.
the gentleman can see now.
No, that I can't speak to. I don't know when those lights were put up, if they were put up before our lighting standards went into place, so that I cannot say.
And you said by right, now, if they wanted to install lighting, but keep the height distance
20 feet.
the 20 feet, maybe it may not, the LEDs may not work, but they have by right put those up, but would have to meet the lighting plan there at the boundaries.
Correct. They would have to meet all of our current lighting standards, and the height fixtures could exceed no more than 20 feet. Just to speak to what Ms. King was mentioning before, the minutes are not in the file, but so I can't speak to what was said at the meeting, but I can read to you real quick what was in Mr. Anthony's staff comments and what was in their application. In the Parks Department's application, which was put together by Lowson Associates, it states that in response to whether there is lighting proposed, it says no lighting is proposed for the site. And then in Mr. Anthony's staff comments, he says, no lighting is shown on the site plan. Should the applicant wish to install lighting at a later time, an amendment to the special use permit will be necessary. Additionally, should any proposed lighting exceed 20 feet in height, a height variance will be necessary. So that was what was a part of the special use permit application But like I said, I don't have access to the minutes right now to let you know what was verbally represented at the meeting.
Chairman Young, were you asking about the Cherry Lane Soccer Complex and their lighting
Well, I'm just, okay, what's the difference? By right, they can put up lights now. It may not a shorter pole versus these taller ones. I guess I'm curious, what's the benefit? I guess the gentleman's being affected would rather them not be used at night, but it's, if you can get some sort of light, is this light better or worse than what you have available by right?
Or this is tremendously better. It's designed for this type of area to have as minimal impact as it can have, specifically lighting up just the field of play. And they point those down. It's pretty amazing how you can see that happen. The newest lights, I believe the gentleman is probably seeing, what are the top field numbers? 12, 13, 14, 15? And I think you've seen those, and I think that we brought those maybe a year and a half ago for a variance when we installed the most recent lighting on the top fields. So that would have been just about a year and a half ago.
In 2016, they had the height request for the Siegel Park. They also had a foot candle variance as well there, so that's probably why they're a little bit brighter over there than our allowable standards.
I didn't remember that. So we allowed something over what,
Yes.
I guess a residential, okay.
Yes, we've recently been giving a lot of applicants a lot of questions about whether or not their variance request is self-created. We've denied many residential applications recently due to a variance being self-created. We've done that recently to our residents here in Murfreesboro. I need to understand either better the definition of what's self-created, or understand better why this isn't something that's self-created by Murfreesboro. I understand that in the past we have, as a body, approved these variances in other parks, but when I look at this and I think about the past history of this property, it is hard for me to understand how this is not a self-created issue.
Agreed.
I think that a key element for us is we have to bring this before any athletic fields, and that's a significant part of what we provide for the community.
But the city decided to put an athletic field here.
Sure.
They determined that this would be an athletic field. So I guess it may be a legal question that I have of what is self-created. How do we determine what is self-created and what's not without being unfair to our residents?
That's a good question. I think Mr. Ives has gone over it somewhat in the past. Of course, you've got in the ordinance what the variance steps are, and you know it's the three-part process: the practical difficulties, the unusual characteristics of the property, and then finally coming to it's not self-created. I think it's important to note that the practical difficulties and unusual characteristics are what contribute to what's in subsection C as being the condition of the property. I understand where your concern is, and I think you could take that argument to its logical extreme to say that anytime anyone wants to do anything with their property, they're self-creating an issue because they want to change what was there previously. I don't think that's what's encapsulated in the variance ordinance here. So I think you have to look at first subsection A, the narrowest, shallowness, or shape, topography, or other condition of the land. And then you look at the unusual characteristics of the property. And then you look at whether or not those two things, the difficulties and the unusual characteristics, create something that is then worthy of a variance. And not just that the property owner wants to do something. Otherwise, like I said, every variance request could be rejected because they're asking to do it on their own.
Well, but at the same time, we have to independently ascertain that each is.
And that's a policy consideration.
passed out before you guys got here were the applicant's responses to each of those. So if you wanted to take a look at that, we provided that as well.
Is this a change from what was in our agenda initially?
It's an addendum.
Okay.
Mr. Williams, I have another question for you. You mentioned, I think, in your opening speech about that there was going to be some construction going on at the Siegel Fields, and that was the need for the lighting. Can you, what exactly are you talking about there?
So we needed increasing capacity. It's not just due to construction. You know, we're not looking to invest $1 million in lighting just to supplement when some of the fields are closed down. This is part of a larger project. Soccer has become a destination, or Murfreesboro has become a destination for soccer development. It's not just for the construction, it's just increased capacity. What we get in benefit also, though, is during the construction, and we have at least 6 fields shut down, we will still be able to increase the capacity and hopefully do our best to meet the needs of all the users of the park as it currently stands. But it's not just for construction capacity, it's for the partnership that we have with Tennessee State Soccer Association, the commitments we've made to be able to host some of these larger events.
As this project moves forward and starts encroaching to the few homes that are there, what tools do we need to consider to try to help the residents that are there? I guess if we denied this application, you could put different type of lights, might not be the most efficient or what you want. We'll probably get them lit, and it sounds like it's something the city feels like they need to move that way. But of course, I can see some, as you rub this project against the people that live there,
Sure.
I guess that gets our tough spot, and what's reasonable and rational for us to consider to help the
I think
people that
we'd be
live close
open
to it. I don't remember what buffering we did around there. It's the day one buffers aren't always enough to handle some issues that may come up if some light spilling over. So I guess that's probably what's given us pause.
Sure.
I thought we talked about, and maybe I'm absolutely on the wrong piece, but I thought that one time there was that discussion about a buffer zone, but the landscaping and everything to create buffers from those homes that were on Leanna Road.
That's why I'm having a hard time not having the minutes in front of me.
Yeah.
Because I remember these conversations, and I don't remember them clearly. And I'm just, I don't want to have been up here about this property when we had so many homeowners here, and we discussed these things, and I don't think it's fair to them for us to be up here a year and a half, 2 years, how long has it been?
It was 16.
16?
Early 16.
3 years, I don't know what time it is, 3 years later, and not, and making some changes with lighting when they were concerned about noise, and that's why we had a buffer that we had to increase. I would really like to review those minutes, and.
We can certainly provide that if that's the wishes of the board.
I mean, and honestly, if we have to sit up here and decide, these things for homeowners, if parks need to be considered differently by our city so that they can make these kinds of changes without having to ask for a variance, then that's something our commissioners and our planning department needs to be considering, rather than this being something we have to do by right I feel like the parks have a right to these lamps. When we're having to make this decision, if we have to make it for homeowners, we have to make the same kind of decision for the city.
It is one of those situations where our ordinance does not really contemplate, it was not really written for these kinds of fixtures. It was written for, the 20-foot height limit and the 30-foot height limit for sites that have buildings greater than 35 feet is really written more for parking lot lighting.
Right.
For, the Avenue, or for Walmart, or
Right.
for a strip center. It's not really, doesn't really contemplate this kind of lighting. And so I agree that the two remedies are to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance, or to amend the ordinance to incorporate standards for these kinds of lighting, these kind of light fixtures into the ordinance. And so at this point, our Parks and Recreation Department has chosen to apply for a variance. Should that request be denied, I think that probably the next logical step would be for us to look at an ordinance amendment so that, we did not have to be in this position every time we have recreational fields.
I have a question. So currently it's zoned RS15.
Until tomorrow, then it'll be zone
And
park.
so it went through Planning Commission.
Planning Commission and City Council.
At that time, how many people from the neighborhood were here at those
It was my
meetings?
recollection that at both the Planning Commission and City Council public hearings, no one spoke.
No one spoke against it.
That's my recollection.
And I'll speak at least for the planning commission. I don't recall a comment from the public, but I could be wrong.
But even still, under the park zoning, still a maximum height of 20 foot. So if it was RS15, it'd be a maximum height of 20 foot. If it was park, it's really makes no difference in that regard.
That's correct.
It's just respect to the lack of, I guess, of traffic and other activities that go on in a residential zone versus a park zone or a commercial zone or industrial zone.
Well, and also if it remained zoned RS15, it would require an amendment to the special use permit and a height variance. And now it only requires a height variance, provided that it does go into effect tomorrow as expected.
Okay.
So really what we're tasked with, assuming that it does change to park, are we willing to make them stay with a 20-foot pole or allow the 50-foot variant, a 50-foot pole? Now, the foot candle light to the property lines and all that would have to be the same. So if we're trying to simplify it, now we're trying to help the residents to see that may be affected by the fields, but it's kind of outside of this application, if that's.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, 20-foot poles just wouldn't be an option. It would actually increase the amount of light that it would take. You'd have to distribute it wider. And just for safety concerns and our regulations that we comply with to keep kids safe on the fields, this is the only type of light we could light this field with.
Okay.
Last question I'm going to ask you, I promise.
I'm glad to.
So where will these lights be situated with respect to Mr. Mangram's property?
Yeah, I think you have a.
I don't have it in front of me, so
I can show you.
approximate
Be on
distance.
the screen.
Do you have that on the map, Mr. Blumley?
I believe Mr. Cooper has it pulled up. Austin, can you put that in slideshow view so it'll increase the size? Austin, can you go around with the cursor and show where those are located?
Mr. Tips, I can show you this as far as the specific. There it is right there.
Yeah.
It shows how much light's coming off on this photometric scale as well.
Show me where Mr. Mangram's property is in relation to these lights.
I believe,
Come on up here.
do you live, is your address on Leanna Road?
Yes, sir, 3724 Leanna.
You're on that side of it.
Yeah,
So I believe-
Come down Cherry and turn left.
I think it's, Austin, I think
Go
it's
up.
the corner of Cherry and Leanna.
Yeah, that's it right there with that. Go down a little bit.
Right there.
Yes, sir. That's it.
The fields are the lightly shaded green.
So those lights are pretty good distance. So say from where that access driveway is, they're south and east of that,
Yes.
the ones that will be lighted. So that other area will be,
That
there's
would
no-
be
there's no-
considered to be part of the Water Resources Department
okay,
field.
thank you,
So these are the 6 fields right here that were on the screen earlier.
thank you.
I think that the houses that are in closest proximity to it are the ones to the north along Cherry Lane.
When this was developed, I guess if it was residential and the bordering properties were residential, buffers weren't as important or required then? Did we do anything to buffer it?
There were buffers required. There were, I believe it was type D buffers that were required along certain property lines. I don't recollect exactly where they were, but those have been installed. And there was an amendment to the special use permit that was approved in 2017 because there was a wet area where I think it was about a 170-foot
Yeah, I do remember.
Yeah.
long stretch of the property line where the buffer couldn't be installed, or where there were difficulties in installing the buffer.
That's what I remember.
That's what I
that
remember.
Conversation
Yes.
about buffers
That was in
time.
late 2017, I think.
That's why I thought it was 2 years ago. That's it.
Yeah.
I can add.
But yeah, you can see, looks like in this shot that Mr. Cooper has on the screen, of course,
North view of the property.
the buffer is kind of in its infancy right there.
There is a berm and a buffer for the most part around the whole property.
The comment that I'll make will go back to what Julie was saying. Irregardless of how we vote on this, I think it's inherent that any time from a planning commission or city council that we rezone something as park, that you're gonna have to have lights in all likelihood associated with whatever's going on in that park. And so I think it only makes sense that we, as a planning commission, change the ordinance that's such that y'all are not having to go through this, and the fact that all residents will know that if something's rezoned to park, you're gonna have lights, and in all likelihood, they're gonna be 70 feet tall until some other technology changes that they may or may not have to be that tall, but today, that's what they need to be. I think that's the best way to handle it going forward. Now, what we do with this application is different.
Mr. Mangrum, I'd like. If you can call on that.
Okay, if you make it quick, if you don't mind.
The issue with us and the neighbors, it was never to, it was the beginning of this conversation was that we're gonna be this, then the foot got in the door, then it became this, and now, in a year or two, we're gonna come back, and now we're gonna add buildings and bathrooms. When the practice fields were first mentioned to us, we had a big meeting at the Siegel Soccer Complex. They had drawings. We kind of knew visually what we were gonna get as a community. The biggest thing, I think, is okay, so now the fields are practice fields. Well, now we're in the door, so now we need lights. Let's get lights. Well, then if we have lights, we have more people, so now we need bathrooms. So it seems like everything's being piecemealed instead of having a plan that everyone can feel comfortable with and understand the impact of the traffic, the community, the street lights, just everything. Because unless you're approving bathrooms now, they're gonna be asking for bathrooms in a year, or buildings or concessions or something like that. Whereas the current complex down on Cherry and the main road, it's a beautiful complex. We love it because it was done at one time and done the right way. I just feel like this is being piecemealed. And when you said no one was here for the previous zoning, I knew nothing about that. Because when I called and they said it had already been rezoned, I knew nothing about that. And I asked my neighbors, and none of us got it. None of us were aware that that meeting was taking place. I'm just saying, if we're gonna do it, let's do it right and make it look nice, but don't just piecemeal it.
All right, thanks, sir.
Thank you all for your time.
And as I mentioned, we have just reviewed a site plan for I think an 1,100 square foot bathroom building on that property as well.
So that probably doesn't require,
Does not require any action from the Board of Zoning Appeals, just in full
It's a park
disclosure.
now.
I'm sorry?
Because it's under park, that's something that can happen now.
Correct.
No problem.
Correct.
Matthew, would it be appropriate to show examples of the lighting from the packet, or?
Oh, the examples of the fixtures?
Yeah.
That are proposed? If that would be helpful to the board,
sure. that's fine. Just want to say that the current lights at the older fields are, they're an older technology, and we're expecting there's more, we realize there's more bleed over or at the property lines than what this is going to produce.
And there actually was a variance for the existing Siegel Soccer Park. When the variance was approved for the height of those light fixtures, there was a variance for exceeding the half-a-foot candle at the property line. That is not a part of this current request for the 6 soccer fields. It's just the height of the fixtures, not for any kind of light spillover. The light spillover would be required to be the half-foot candle at the property line.
I believe what Mr. Mingram's seeing from his backyard is our top fields that don't have the LED technology. We're looking at every chance we get to install these lights. It's just smart for us to go ahead and put in the LED technology because it's much more beneficial to anybody who's close to that, even though it does cost more. It's more efficient, and it also helps with the splash. So I think what he's seeing are those fields that don't have that, and I hope eventually we're going to be transitioning all of our athletic fields into this technology.
It's a noticeable difference at Adams Tennis Center having those types of lights. Now, maybe Mr. Mangrum hadn't seen that. It hadn't seen it, doesn't realize it. Over there, I've noticed it. It is much different. It's not as obtrusive beyond the playing area surfaces.
Further questions for staff or?
I'll speak up. Julie's comments, coming into this, I would have just felt like that you need 70-foot lights because it's a soccer field. It's inherent. But I'm also thinking about one of the applications that Julie's probably thinking about where we denied a request for someone building a house downtown because their building footprint was taking up too much of the green area space of that lot. And so we felt like that was self-created and we denied it. So I guess this comes down to whether we feel like this is self-created or not. It's an opinion. I think it's inherent. Go back to reading the minutes and seeing what was said and what was not said. It's still to me, it's gonna boil down as to whether this is self-created or not. It's hard to do one thing and say another when we've dealt with whether we feel like this is self-created or not. Again, I get it from the wholesale of the city. This is what's best for Parks and Rec, and I get that. I do think that no matter what happens here, we got to concentrate on changing the ordinance. So, and I'm not ready to make a motion one way or the other at this point. I'd like to hear from other board members to see what their opinion is.
I would echo what Ken has said, and if something had happened at Siegel Fields, like a tornado or something, and we needed this field, to have some bleed over, but just to help improve it because we've become a soccer destination, I still feel is very self-created. So that's where I am sort of landing too. I'm having definitely agree with Julie's comments earlier and Ken's as well.
In a community growing like ours, and certainly we've heard the soccer and the growth it's experienced, it's trying to figure out, okay, how can these two entities that are growing coexist, the soccer plus the people that live out here in Cherry Lane. It's, you know, I guess we may see more of the city growing out to these areas. I feel like lights there, if you take just this piece, just this application of height variance with the technology, the light spillover, it'd be a negligible impact. You'd have certainly a taller pole there, but as far as the effect of light compared to the neighbors is, we can be managed and be reasonable. I guess probably what we're all struggling with, okay, all these people coming in and out of, and going until 9 o'clock at night, makes you scratch your head. That part makes you squirm a little bit. I mean, you know, I guess with it not so I don't know. It's a tricky one for sure. You know, again, like I said, that the application in of itself, I think the reason to have the maximum height is to manage, I assume, the lights and the view shed. You can't, you know, taller pole's a taller pole. We can manage the light with technology now. It's just what that brings to this site later on, different hours, and the residences that are around it. And I don't know if a buffer is enough to fix that problem or not. And that may not be what we're asked to look at, but probably making us all think.
I guess, and I'll play both sides here, just looking at what was given to us, the Parks and Rec or the city stance is that because it is inherent that you would have to use a 70-foot pole, it's not self-created. Is that kind of what we're arguing here?
Well, I'm not trying to argue anything.
Well,
For us,
stance.
the notion of the self-inflicted, I mean, that would say that we could never put lights on any fields, because by definition, if you go with that thought process, everything would be self-inflicted, and we'd never be able to light any fields moving forward, and that's just not something that we can do. That's,
right.
You can't operate a department and serve the residents of Murfreesboro the way you need to without doing lighting of fields. So I think that would be kind of my statement towards that is, on that assertion, you'd never be able to light any field if it's a self-inflicted concept.
So it goes back to changing the ordinance. I mean, how quickly, I don't know if this is a fair question, but how quickly can that be done?
It would be the same process for any kind of rezoning or ordinance amendment, roughly 4 to 5 months.
How would that affect you?
Tremendously.
Okay.
This is the first step for us in this process. It has to be, because of the nature of what we're going to be losing, potentially the whole, we can't get into means and methods with our contractor too much, and we haven't finalized a contract with them. So we've requested that they consider only shutting down 4 or 5 fields at a time, but they might have the ability to have to shut down the whole park. And then we will not be able to serve the residents, especially based on construction. That's why this is kind of phase 1A, and 1B would be the fields, and 1C is the indoor facility that kind of goes side by side.
And this is because of the partnership, whatever you want to call it, with the state
Yes,
soccer
sir.
association?
Mr. Tips, as I told you earlier, we won I guess you'd call the bid with the Tennessee State Soccer. They're moving their headquarters to Murfreesboro. It's a tremendous asset for our community and the residents and the visitors here. So this is a part of that project.
Wasn't it initially going to be out in a much more out west?
We evaluated that.
But it wasn't it intent to be that way? In an area near 840 where there'd be probably a lot less density around it?
Not necessarily.
No?
We looked at a lot of options, and all options. We never had a plan to go with anything specifically. We worked closely with them to show what we could do with this facility. Well, we didn't think it would be wise use of taxpayer dollars to build, 16 fields at another piece of property when we can enhance what we have now, and this is the enhancement that we need to be able to serve not just TSSA, but be able to serve our community that's growing. We have fields, and that's kind of the premise of where we're here now. We have fields that we need to improve, and this is a much-needed improvement to the whole complex. TSSA aside, if that didn't even happen, this is an improvement. That's just an extra reason is that we did go. We won that competition, and we're excited to have them as partners. But this is something that we do need to move forward, and it's the first step for us before we can really proceed with anything else. And our desire is to break ground at the first week of January on the turf fields.
Well, Mr. Chairman, unless somebody makes a motion that the application dies for lack of any action.
I believe that's the case.
Unless somebody wants to move the table or defer.
I mean, I'd like to do all we could do to work this out. So instead of having a no motion where it fails, I'm going to make a motion that we defer and that we, as a group, get a better understanding of how this is not self-created, unless we've hashed this out that that's not going to change. I've always been, especially on the planning commission, try to make my decisions based upon what is the best for the whole community and not necessarily how it may, and I don't take this the wrong way, how it would negatively impact, if that's the case, one or two individuals associated with the whole community. I'd just like for us somehow to come to an agreement, or that we could feel comfortable of how we can move forward with this based upon some decisions we've made in the past. That's just an opinion. But I'd rather not kill it at this point because I know there's quite a bit on the line here.
I concur with Mr. Halliburton, and also likewise what Ms. King said. We can't have a double standard between what applications that the city puts before this board as opposed to what our taxpaying residents put before the board too. And I do think we need a little more understanding of this before we take any action. I'm very sensitive to what the property owner had to say. But I also understand, I think a little bit that yes, the lighting is much higher, but it's this type of lighting is probably not as impactful as they're proposing as the standard that's in place now is. And I don't know if Mr. Laird and Mr. Williams would agree with that statement, but that's what from my observations are.
As far as it being impactful?
Yeah, as far as it being, it appears like from the places I've seen this type of lighting, that it doesn't bleed over as much as
That's why we're
the
going
old
with this
type.
technology, and that's why we're putting this request in front of you. And I think that's why we're requesting to spend about 25% more, is to help those that might be affected the best we can. There is no bleed over with these lights. I think if you were looking from gentleman's backyard and you could see the fields, you're not going to see a change in light after these fields are going to come in. You'd still see the glow from the top fields that were done in non-LED technology, but it's hard to see from a faraway way that these lights are even on, to be honest with you. I think if you go look at the technology, I think you'd be pleased with understanding that it's not very impactful to the surrounding areas.
And the last comment, I guess, is just like Mr. Mangrum. I mean, I think, John F. Kennedy said, the only thing constant in life is change, and that's one thing we're always going to have to be dealing with. And you're going to see it, regardless of what happens here with the recreation department there at the soccer field, it's going to continue. And, you know, some of that, we're just going to have to either embrace or do something else maybe. I don't know.
If I could just reaffirm, the timeline on this is significant for us in this whole project and the commitment we've made to the Tennessee State Soccer Association to move their headquarters to Murfreesboro.
I mean, the only argument that I could make at this point is that by right, you would have to do it at 20 feet height, whether it's RS-15 or whether it's park. And so the stance, argument, whatever, would be that it's inherent that you would have to have these poles at this height. And because of that, that's not self-created. That's the only thought process that I could lead towards this and having any, and then the fact of what Mr. Tipp said, that it's hopefully be negligible impact on the people surrounding based upon the technology of the fixtures themselves.
And if I could say, the 20-foot poles, that's not a product that exists.
Right.
That's not something that you can light a soccer field with. That there's just no option for that. We believe this is the best thing, the best option that we've presented to you is the option to go with. And I assure you, we approach this looking to be with understanding that there are residents around, and we think that this is the best product for this, or the best application for this situation.
I think the city has provided the best way to light these fields in the application here. It's what comes with more activity to 9 o'clock at night with these fields that I guess have given us the heartburn or the decision. So I guess we're at a defer. I guess the applicant in those situations need to agree to that, and we need to make sure we're going to get the information.
Did you have, was that a motion?
No.
Recommendation maybe, or a thought?
Yeah, it was not a motion.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm in favor of the application reluctantly, given the reasons for the people around, but it's, I understand the other members of the board, they're struggling and try to help, these two entities coexist, the residents of this area and then the need for the soccer association and the people, the rest of the community that benefit from this, so.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Sure.
Something that we might be able to work on in conjunction as a policy on the lighting times. I mean, we do need there's tournaments, there are things that happen that we would have to understand that it can't be cut and dry all the time. But that's something that Mr. Laird and his staff can look at, developing a policy that really could hone in.
This is primarily older youth and adults that play at these later times. These aren't little kids.
Mr. Laird, would you mind coming up to the podium, please?
Keep in mind that the soccer club does a fantastic job of balancing the users. So most of your little kids are practicing right after school. These folks that are playing at 8, 9 o'clock at night, most of them are older teenagers, adults, and more in the competitive or select side, so that these parents are paying large amounts of money for these kids to have these soccer careers and, vie for all the benefits that competitive soccer can have.
What do you, Mr. Laird, what do you envision the latest time that you would need the fields to be lit would be?
Well, our staff tries to have a set policy that all practice and games must be over with by 9 p.m. with the exception of major tournaments. But even when major tournaments come in, we try to draw that line at 10 o'clock. So unless we get unusual circumstances, weather during the day or delays during the day, we try to really hold firm on those times, 9 p.m., and then our extensions at tournament times is 10 p.m. And, it's a balancing act because soccer club wants to be there as long as they possibly can. So when we say 9 o'clock, for safety reasons, it's probably 9:15 or 9:20 for everybody to exit the park and before we actually turn the lights off so people aren't leaving a dark park. But the majority of these are older kids and adults that play. We have a very vibrant soccer community from adults down.
I don't really think that's the issue. I really think it's more of a quiet time, if you will, to the neighbors. I mean, again,
Right.
if this is in an industrial or a commercial zone,
Right.
retail zone, I don't think that's
Well, the 9
that's an
o'clock
issue.
was
But
set,
the fact
I
that it's
guess-
so, there's so much other residential area around it, that's where I would say, okay, we need to have a hard and fast rule on that, but it still don't take care of the whole problem, but still.
I believe when Siegel Park was originally built, and that was an agreement that they had made with the neighborhood, was that they would use 9 o'clock, and we tried to really adhere to that policy, and we try to stay with that. And that's been 14 years.
This is probably a question for staff. We don't have any authority to refer something back to planning or refer it to the city council with respect to these very apparent challenges that it has. I think Mr. Williams, Mr. Laird stated their case very, very well about the necessity of 70-foot versus 20-foot. And so, but with the challenge that we have, is this something that can be sent back with a recommendation from this committee or commission to one of those to adjust that park zoning restriction?
To like amend the ordinance so
Yeah,
that a variance
I
would
would
not be
say, yeah.
necessary in the future?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think as acting director, I hear you loud and clear, and I think that one of the things, after looking back at how many times we've had to have this issue in front of us, I think it would be perfectly appropriate for us to bring up to the Planning Commission to discuss whether or not they wish to have the ordinance amended. And I think our Planning Commission representative on the Board of Zoning Appeals has indicated his desire to have the ordinance amended so that we are not confronted with this issue in the future. And I think that we hear that loud and clear.
I'm gonna make a motion that we approve, based upon the fact that the city would be allowed to have 20-foot poles, but it's inherent that you, in essence, the 70-foot poles are the only thing that would work with respects to these fields, and that it is not self-made based upon the fact that these would be the only type of poles that could be used with respects to this facility.
I'm going to second the motion.
And would that be contingent upon the rezoning going into effect?
Does it, I thought by right it was RS-15 or Park that it was.
No, so the request, what I alluded to earlier, the rezoning to Park goes into effect tomorrow. And so we had asked that any approval be contingent upon that rezoning going into effect because it affects whether or not a special use permit is needed for this. Under the park zoning, you just need the height variance. Under the RS-15 zoning, you need the special use permit amendment.
I see
and the
what you're
height
saying.
variance.
Yes.
So
I'll
we would ask that.
stipulate that as long as
It goes to park.
it goes to Park as of tomorrow or the next time it's voted on.
Yes, tomorrow, it's past second and final reading. There's a 15-day waiting period after second and final
I'm
reading.
with you.
And that 15-day waiting period is over tomorrow.
Well, what remedies are there to change it anyways then at this point?
To change what?
To stop it from going to a park zoning as opposed to RS-15? One more day, I mean, can somebody file an injunction today and stop it?
I get
Okay. Well, I still second the motion, and for the point of discussing that motion, it is inherent, we've heard the testimony from our experts here, that parks need better, less restrictive lighting standards, and I'm just saying, as a part of that, we need, or a separate motion, maybe it is, that we need to make a recommendation that the planning commission and the city council do what's necessary to deal with that in park areas.
I don't think a separate motion is needed. I think we hear you, and we'll begin work on that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
All right, that application's been passed. Thanks, everyone, for their time. Next item on our agenda is staff reports and other business.
I have none.
Have none.
Except if you haven't gotten your continuing education, and you know who you are, I'm just joking, please remember to do so by December 31st.
Gotcha.
We have another one tomorrow, right?
Yes, we have another one tomorrow. You can get an hour and a half tomorrow at noon at the planning department.
Sounds good. And with that, we'll adjourn.